გამარჯობათ, მოგესალმებით ყველას. დღეს ყავს ძალიან საპატიო სტუმარი დანიელ ლევი, ბარ-ილანის და ემორის უნივერსიტეტებიდან. ჩვენ ამ ლექციით ვიწყებთ ინგლისურენოვანი ლექციების ციკლს და მომავალში შემოგთავაზებთ ინგლისურენოვან ლექციებს სხვადასხვა საკითხებზე. მაგრამ ამ დიდი პატივია, რომ ამ ციკლს გავხსნით დანიელ ლევით, რომელიც დაიბადა საქართველოში და გაიზარდა ცხაკაიაში, დღევანდელ სენაკში. ბაკალავრის ხარისხი მოიპოვა ეკონომიკასა და სტატისტიკაში ბენ-გურიონის უნივერსიტეტიდან, რის შემდეგაც სწავლა განაგრძო ეკონომიკის სადოქტორო პროგრამაში კალიფორნიის უნივერსიტეტში Irvine-ში, UC Irvine. ამჟამად არის პროფესორი და William Gittes დეკანი ბარ-ილანის და ემორის უნივერსიტეტებში, ასევე არის მოწვეული ლექტორი ISET-ში, თბილისში. იგი არის ისრაელის ეკონომიკური ასოციაციის პრეზიდენტი და მისი მთავარი კვლევის საგანია ფაზების ცვლილება და ფასების ელასტიურობა და სიხისტე. კიდევ ერთხელ ძალიან დიდი მადლობა ბატონ დანიელ, რომ დაგვთანხმდით მოწვევაზე და გვენია ეკრანი.
დიდი მადლობა მოწვევისთვის. მე არ ვიცოდი ამ საზოგადოების შესახებ არაფერი, ქართველ მეცნიერთა საერთაშორისო საზოგადოება ძალიან სასიამოვნოა ყოფნა და ძალიან მიხარია თქვენი ნახვა და რამდენიმე სახელები მე ჩემთვის ცნობილიც არიან, და ეს მართლა გამიხარდა მათი ნახვა. ბოდიშ გიხდით წინასწარ ერთ გვერდი ქართულად იქნება, დანარჩენი ინგლისურად. მე დავიბადე დანიელ ლევიაშვილი. ეს იყო ქალაქ სენაკში 13 წლის წინ. ბოდიშ 13 წლის ვიყავი, რომ მშობლებმა გადაწყვიტა სენაკში ცხოვრობდი, მე ვიყავი 13 წელი და მე მშობლებმა გადაწყვიტა ისრაელში წამოსვლა. ახლა მე თელ-ავივში ვარ, ჩემს სახლში აქ, ეს არის ჩემი სახლის სარდაფი აქ, კიდევ ლაპარაკობ. და რომ მოვედი აქ ისრაელში, რამ ცოტა ენობანი, რა ქვია მაგას, ენობრივი, linguistic, ენობრივი პრობლემები მქონდა, მაგალითად, ერთი მაგალითი, ცხაკაიაში ვლაპარაკობდით მეგრულად, რა თქმა უნდა, სამეგრელოში ცხოვრობდით, მახსოვს ცოტა კიდე, ვლაპარაკობდით ქართულად, ვლაპარაკობდით რუსულად და ვლაპარაკობდით გერმანულად. გერმანული ვიცოდით კარგად, მითომ რომ ჩვენი გერმანული მასწავლებელი ჩვენი მეზობელი იყო. და ნუ ახლა ჩემი მშობლები ცხენოდათ, რომ ცუდი მასწავლებლები რომ ყოფილიყავით, ხო და ნუ გერმანულიც ვიცოდით. ისრაელში მოვედი აქ, საშუალო სკოლაში შევედი და მითხრეს, სამი ახალი ენა უნდა ისწავლო. ივრითული, არაბული და ინგლისური. არც ერთი ენა რომ ვიცოდი არ გამომადგა. აქ ჯარი დავამთავრე ეკონომიკური და სტატისტიკური ფაკულტეტი ბენ-გურიონის უნივერსიტეტში დავამთავრე. ბენ-გურიონი ისრაელის პირველი პრემიერ-მინისტრი იყო. და ეს იყო ქალაქ ბერ-შებაში. ბერ-შება ბიბლიაში ნახსენი ქალაქი არის. აბრაამ ეს პიროვნება, ბიბლიური პიროვნება ბერ-შებაში ცხოვრობდა ბიბლიის მიხედვით. ეს ძალიან ისტორიული ადგილი არის. და დოქტორატისთვის ამერიკაში წავედი. მე რომ დავამთავრე სწავლა, ერთი წელი, okay, now I switch to English. I apologize and I will talk slowly. Oh, Georgi, good to see you. Wow.
Nice to see you.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, look, it's fun. So, okay,
no problem at all.
Oh, wow, look at this. These are all familiar faces. Guga, you must have. Okay, you must forgive me for getting excited. I see all these familiar names and faces. So
absolutely understandable.
So, very briefly, after I finished my PhD, see, I promised my parents that as soon as I finished my studies, I would return. But promises are promises and actions are different. You know, when you are in America, America is very amazing place. It's a land of opportunities. And so suddenly I discovered there's a job market, and I can go to the job market there, and I can look for an academic position in the US. And that was very tempting, of course. And so I've decided to do that. So I told my parents, I need a few more years. And that few more years lasted 18 years, unfortunately. So that part I always regret. And more familiar faces, wonderful. After 1 year at Union College, which is it's a small liberal arts college in upstate New York, I spent 12 years at Emory University, 6 years as assistant professor, 6 years as associate professor, and then we decided to come back to Israel because we have a big family here. And so in the US, we had some funny linguistic challenges as well. See, I talked to my kids, they were born in the US, so I talked to them in Georgian. My wife talked to them in Hebrew because my wife is Israeli. So we were raising them as trilinguals because English was their language. And people would overhear us talking, me and my kids, talking in Georgian, so they would ask, what language are you using? This is in Atlanta, right? And so I would say, oh, it's Georgian. And so they didn't know what to make of it. So they would kind of laugh. They thought that, you know, I was just being silly. And so their reaction would be, oh, sure, Georgian. And then I had to remind them that, no, there is Georgian language. There is a country, Georgia, former Soviet Republic. And then after I would explain that, boy, they would feel embarrassed, right? And then they would go, oh, of course, there is Georgia, of course, Georgian, yeah. So currently I'm at Bar-Ilan University, and I study behavior of prices mainly, and also I'm doing some other things, and this is additional thing you young people should remember, okay? You see, so I have a lot of things on my desk, right? So I teach at Emory University still. I come to ISET to teach, but also I am academic advisor to the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics. I am an academic advisor to the Israeli Center for the Promotion of Fairness in Public Life. And I have all these other things. Now, why am I saying this? Because, you see, at the beginning, I thought that after I finish my PhD, life will be good. I will be at home at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. So that's what I promised my wife. I said, yeah, I will finish PhD and you will see me every day at 4 o'clock. That's not what happened, obviously, because I became assistant professor, and to get tenure, you have to work really, really hard. You work weekdays and weekends, day and night. And at that point, I told her, I will get tenure and then life will be good. And then at that point, I discovered that you cannot make these promises have no value, because that's not what really happens. What really happens is that as you make progress in your academic career, you actually get busier. Why? Because as you make progress, more people want your attention, more journals want your review reports, more conferences invite you, more students want that you supervise them, etc. So you don't get less work, you get more work, not less. So it's exactly opposite. So make plans accordingly, please. Okay, don't make promises like I made. So I have some PhD students, I have MA students, and committee assignments. You see, committee assignments, any number of committee assignments that is greater than 0 is too much, in my opinion. Okay, so that's what I mean. So, so I work on behavioral prices, and my secondary research area also is on convergence. Convergence is a phenomenon where poor countries catch up with rich countries. Our models, the neoclassical model, predicts that poor countries should catch up. We should see this phenomena. And so that means that poor countries close the gap. and sometimes we call it catch-up, sometimes we call it income convergence. The data shows a more complex story. For instance, there are convergence clubs, meaning poor countries converge among themselves, rich countries converge among themselves, but rich countries remain richer than poor countries. So there are these convergence clubs. For instance, there are other stories there. So since this is, I understand this is interdisciplinary group, I know there are some economists, but not all. Let me kind of couple of slides explain about economics. So economics is a social science. And Adam Smith, the author of Wealth of Nations, is considered the founding father of our discipline. And Adam Smith was actually a moral philosopher, which means that the origin of our discipline is in moral philosophy, which is very interesting because nowadays economics is known as a dismal science. As, for instance, people talk about capitalists and some very negative connotations. But the founding fathers were moral philosophers. Think about the contrast between the current image of our discipline versus what these people were doing. In past, economists felt superior to people from other disciplines. They claim that the economists' method is true scientific method. And as evidence, they use the fact that Nobel Prize is awarded among all social scientists only to economists. We have economics Nobel Prize. There is no Nobel Prize in psychology. There is no Nobel Prize in sociology, criminology, geography, etc. Of course, nobody takes this seriously, this claim. More importantly, I think there's this phenomenon of economic imperialism. What do I mean by imperialism of economics? That's the idea that economics way of thinking made inroads into other disciplines. So a lot of people in political science use models that are borrowed from economists, for instance, and same thing with sociology, psychologists, etc. And so in that sense, economics is known as imperialist science because it just kind of went outside its domain and conquered these other domains in a sense. Okay, so here is one book that discusses this idea of economic imperialism, right? So just to give you examples of this economic imperialism, Gary Becker was a professor of economics in Chicago, and then he became professor of sociology, and he got Nobel Prize. Same thing with Daniel Kahneman, psychologist, got Nobel Prize in economics. Look at this. Elinor Ostrom, political scientist, Nobel Prize in economics. We have historians, Paul Krugman, this guy with big mouth that writes this column in New York Times, okay, wonderful economist, right? He's an economic geographer, actually. So this is that economic imperialism. And if you think about, if you go outside this, if you beyond these individuals, look at this. There are so many articles, hundreds of articles and books with these kinds of titles: economics of religion, economics of war, economics of language. So you would think language is not a natural domain that economists should study, right? It has nothing to do with profits. It has nothing to do with economic well-being, perhaps, nothing direct, of course. But economists have conquered these areas also. So there are papers and books studying these areas as well. And this is not new for economists, but this might be new for people from other disciplines. Okay. So our paper, Potterian Economics, is part of that, part of economic imperialism. So we are now looking at the literary work, right? Harry Potter, the well-known series. And we are going to study the economics of Harry Potter. We call it Potterian Economics. Okay. Now, a simple way of describing Potterian Economics is to say that Potterian Economics is basically the economics that you find in Harry Potter's books. And indeed, there is plenty of economics in these books, the difficulty, the challenge is that most people miss that. Even professional economists miss this. When a colleague of mine came to visit us here and I was telling him about this project, he said, I don't see any economics in Harry Potter. So I started giving him a list. And so I kept going on and on because that list is really long. Okay, we have already written 2 papers on this, and we are writing a book. So there is a really long list of all these economic ideas found in Potterian world. And at a certain point, he said, you know what, you're right, I missed all that. Now, we take, of course, this is, some people perhaps might not take this entire thing seriously, which is absolutely fine. After all, these are fun books to read, right? For perhaps it was written for kids at the beginning, but we know now that it is popular among people of all ages, and regardless of where they are, regardless of the language they speak, because these books have been translated to so many different languages. We take this very seriously. We take this very seriously, so I'd like to describe it as that last line. This is a most serious study of the least serious subject. Okay, so we try to do it really seriously. We are professional economists, so we do that. This paper is co-authored with Avichai Snir, who did my PhD with me, and now we are co-authors. Now, we are not first to study literature from economics point of view. So it's not the first study of economic analysis of literary work. Brockhoff studied Wizard of Oz to study monetary economics. Dixit studies mixed strategies. Dixit is a well-known game theorist. He studies mixed strategies using Princess Bride, my favorite book, and Threats and Commitments from Dr. Strangelove. Friedman, Rose, and Milton Friedman study equality using Alice in Wonderland. So that's not new. Economists have done that before. Question is, why Harry Potter? Well, more than 500 million copies of Harry Potter have been sold worldwide. That puts Harry Potter books 5th in ranked first in sales after the Quran, the Bible, Chairman Mao's quotation, and Don Quixote. Okay. Now, if we think about more than 500 million people, that means more than 6.5% of the world population, which is crazy when you think about children's book. More than 6.5% of what, more than 6 billion people we have in the world have read these books, and know that this is a conservative estimate. How do we know that? Because usually when we buy a book, more than one person reads the book. The book has been translated to 80 languages, doesn't include many unauthorized translations. It has been translated even to dead languages, Latin, Harius, Potter, and ancient Greek, Harios, Potir. Ancient Greek. More than $9 billion revenue from movie sales. I don't know what it means in terms of how many people saw the movies, right? The movie adaptations. Now, if you're not familiar with Harry Potter story, there's this 3-minute summary at this website. If you want, they do it in a very hilarious way. So this is in case you are not familiar with Harry Potter books. Okay, so I will give you no spoilers here about the story itself. Now, very briefly, since this is a serious study, we are going to treat Potterian economics as a version of economic model. That's the idea of doing this analysis seriously. So I need to briefly explain what we mean when we say economic model. Okay, so economic model, again, because this is an interdisciplinary group, economic model is a theoretical construct, okay? So you can think of it as a simplified version of reality. Like in physics, you would simplify the world by assuming that there is no friction, for instance, or there is vacuum. So you simplify the world. So we simplify the world. Why do we do that? Because, first of all, the goal of these models is to understand and predict economic behavior. Okay? And real economies are highly nonlinear, they are dynamic, they are stochastic, and therefore, to make it manageable, we have to make it simple enough so that we can actually work with this, but it has to be complex enough to capture the key features that we would like to understand. And so there's this balancing act when we work with these economic models. Now, technically, economic models are systems of equations, really. So usually these are systems of differential equations if we work in continuous time, or systems of difference equations if one works in discrete time. And these equations, differential equations or difference equations, can be stochastic or they can be deterministic, depending kind of world we are trying to imitate, the kind of world we are trying to study. And this can be linear, what people in electrical engineers call linear quadratic models. So this can be linear quadratic models, or this can be nonlinear models. And these models are basically used to describe economic dynamics, which means how the economy, different sectors of the economy, for instance, evolves over time and how they interact with each other. And so these are very similar to the models used in physics, actually. And this last line actually is a theme for a seminar on its own, how economics and physics compare to each other. Really interesting. There are even papers people have written on that. The differences and similarities between economics and physics. All right. So then this is the last slide, because we are going to work with a model that is not really written in using differential equations. It's a story. So our model is actually a fable. Schapari, right? Is that right? Fable? Schapari, right? Schapari, fairy tale, if you will. Right now, if one thinks, there are a lot of similarities actually between models and fables, and some people have written on that. A well-known game theorist, Ariel Rubinstein, has a paper where he discussed these similarities, for instance. Okay, similarities between models, formal models, versus fables, which are kind of also models, but they are informal. They are not too different because both are approximations of some kind of reality. Both can be dismissed easily by claiming that they are too simplistic or they are too unrealistic. You can always claim that, of course. But this is precisely their advantage, right? They are simple. And since they are approximations, they must be false. All models are false. We know that. That's why we call them models. However, both can be useful. Nevertheless, right? So with that, we move to Potterian Economics. So again, think, I'm an economist. I think about the Potterian world. It's a fun story, wonderful. And when you read it, you don't pay attention to economics. So in order to really pay attention to economics, you have to take these Harry Potter volumes, right? So we have these are Harry Potter books, right? Now let's see. This is one in the Chamber of Secrets, right? This is one. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. This is another one. Here's Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallow. Here we go. There are 7 volumes, and there are a couple of additional books that came. Now, you read this, boy, you enjoy it, and you don't pay attention to, you don't notice any economics. So we had to read these books again, but this time not having fun, but looking for economics. And just to give you a sense of, well, maybe towards the end I'll show you. So what do we do? So Potterian Economics, what you discover is a multi-sector economic model. That is, you have several sectors there, there are cross-sector effects. What you would find in standard economic models, there are numerous economic constructs, economic institutions. A lot of these are embedded in social organization of Potterian's life. That is, well, and let's see. Now, we are not first to study Potterian economics. Okay, Govin and Schooner study Potterian's bank. They have only one bank called Gringotts. Okay, we have a paper where we study economic growth in the Potterian economy. Okay, so we actually take Solo's model. Those of you who are familiar with Solo model, we test the predictions of Solo model using Potterian economy. So we look at the population, we look at the stock of capital, technology, exactly what the Solo model says. In the current paper, what we do is we study the entire economic structure. You can think of it as the macroeconomic structure of the Potterian world. So, economic institutions, let's start. Wizards, of course. The entire story takes place in the school of wizardry, right? Wizards use magic, but there is still scarcity. See, magic cannot solve all problems. For instance, there are rich and there are poor. And so, right, so magic cannot make the poor people wealthy. Okay, so there are limitations. So there is scarcity. And if there is scarcity, there must be trade. That's what we know from economics. And if there is trade, you need institutions that allow trade, which means markets, shopping centers. You need medium of exchange in order to be able to trade money. You need some kind of law and order. And you need perhaps public sector, government, somebody who sets these rules. And so once you start thinking about the Potterian economics as an economy, then you start looking for these objects in the story, see? You start looking for this, and you find them there. So let's start with money, for instance. Here we go. Potterians use commodity money. What is a commodity money? Commodity money is a money that is made of valuable, that itself, the commodity itself in the money is valuable. For instance, if it's made of gold, then the gold, you can melt it and use it as gold. So that's what makes it valuable. Modern money, of course, is not commodity money. Pieces of paper have no value of their own, right? We call this fiat money, right? Commodity money, their commodity money consists of 3 coins. They have bronze nuts, they have silver sickles, and they have gold galleons. And if you have not seen them recently, here they are. Okay, this is gold galleon. Look at this. This is gold galleon. Okay, shiny gold. Okay, you know, if you go to the UK, to the Harry Potter Museum, you buy these things, right? So this is Potterian money. Now, 1 silver sickle is equivalent to 29 nuts, and 1 galleon is equivalent to 17 sickles, which resembles British pound system, but not exactly, because the conversion rate is strange here. It's a prime number. Look at this. These are prime numbers, which is crazy when you think about it. Conversion rates are prime numbers. So, okay, let's continue. Now, in a real world where commodity money is used, the value of purchasing power of that money varies with the commodity value, the value of that commodity. So if it's made of gold and gold becomes more expensive for some reason, because now it becomes more valuable for using it in making jewelry, for instance, then the purchasing power of gold coins would increase. But that's not what's happening in Potterian economics. Okay, you see, their conversion rates are fixed. So even if gold becomes more valuable, you don't see that in Potterian economy. Okay, so this is not consistent. It doesn't make sense. All galleons, it turns out that these gold coins, galleons are different size, but they are same in the value, which doesn't make sense. If one contains more gold than the other, they cannot have same value. That's not consistent. Now it gets worse. Let's think about exchange rates. So Potterian world consists of wizards, those that know how to use magic, with special powers, right? And ordinary mortals. right? They are called the muggles in the book, right? And the exchange rate, they can trade with each other. The exchange rate, it turns out, of 1 galleon is about $7.50. Okay, we converted this from British pound. Okay, about $7.50. Now, 1 galleon, if you think of a gold coin, average gold coin, how much it weighs in history, about 5 grams, 5.5 grams. And when the first book was published in 1998, actually, the value of that much gold was about $68 in Muggle world. So smart business people who see our business people's job is to make profit, buy low, sell high. What would they should have done? Okay, business people, Potterian business people should have taken the gold, melt it, and sell it to the muggles for $68, and they make instant profit of 800%. Look at that. We don't see anybody doing this in Potterian economy. Okay, this doesn't make any sense. This is not consistent. Look at that. We call this arbitrage opportunity. Basically, Potterians leave money on the table, and this doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, prices are low in Potterian economy. They are round, and they use only. I'm sorry, question?
No, I think someone was unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Please feel free to stop me. Okay. Am I talking too fast? Am I okay? But, you know, if you want to comment, to say, please. This is. Yeah. This is. You know, I hope some of you have read this, and so you actually, you know, can actually connect and relate to this in a more substantive way, perhaps. Okay. I hope. So prices are set. So yes, please.
Sorry, can I actually ask, how does the supply of gold or supply of commodity work?
So we'll come to it in a moment.
Okay.
Next slide. Thank you, David. Thank you. Okay. So the prices are set in such a way that you have to use only one type of coin, because they are not really easily exchangeable for each other because of these prime numbers, prime conversion rate. So the price are like 1 galleon, 5 shekels, 4 nuts, etc., which makes sense. J.K. Rowling, I guess, had to somehow make it manageable. Okay, so she chose this crazy conversion rate. So the pricing, she set them kind of in a way that you can actually manage. Heterogeneous goods, very different goods, have same price. So for, like, you know, you can, for 10 galleons, you can get omnicolors, or it's a unicorn hair, or many other things. Now, prices are rigid, however. Now, that part is consistent with my other work, right? New Keynesian model assumes that prices are rigid. Guga, you mentioned in Georgian, it's called stich. What did you say? You used the word
Stichiste.
Stichiste.
მაგრამ ეგ ფიზიკაში არის, არ ვიცი თუ ეკონომისტებიც იყენებენ ამას.
One minute, we have economists here, so they will tell us. Okay, Maka.
რაც ვიყენებ ციხისტე, ხისტი ფასები.
Ხისტი ფასები? Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So, and that's what I've been studying in my research. So that part, prices they don't change. How do I know? The prices are the same from the first volume to the 7th volume. They don't change. You see, of the books. Okay, so they don't change. They are rigid. And the J.K. Rowling took 20 years to write this. So as far as we are concerned, prices are rigid for 20 years. They haven't changed. All right. So this is consistent with an economy that is in equilibrium in steady state without growth. Okay, if you have a background in physics, the language we use when we talk about economics, steady state, etc., is very similar to the language people use in physics also. All right. So Potterian Bank. So in Muggle economies, regular economies, banks take deposit, right? That's what we do. We deposit, we put our money in the bank, and they use it to make profit. How? They lend it at higher interest rate, right? This is their main business model. In Wizards economy, the banks, there's only one bank actually. It's called Gringotts, and they're engaged in what kind of services they offer. They offer this you can store money there. Okay, so safe for safekeeping. Actually, the movie, if you remember, the story starts with that, right? Harry Potter goes to. Oops, sorry. So, Harry Potter goes to bank to withdraw some money, if you recall. They also provide foreign exchange services, so you can go and exchange currency, and they are in charge of minting, so which means they serve a little bit like central bank. And what they do is they send people for expedition, for gold hunting expeditions. This is where the gold comes from. Okay, so they send some of their people for gold search, but they don't lend, which is the main job of banks. They don't lend. Okay, now bankers in wizards economy are goblins. Very stereotypical, terrible image, right? Look at this. This is how they look. Very negative image of bankers, which if you're familiar a little bit with the 15th, 16th century Italy, for instance, this was the image of bankers then in Italy, right? So this is very stereotypical of that. All right, so banks we describe as financial intermediaries. What do we mean? In economics, right? In modern economics, bank's role is to take money from savers and channel it to investors. So that's that process of we put money in the bank, and then people who want to borrow, to invest, they come and take that money. So that process is called intermediation, financial intermediation. And so that's what banks do in real economies. But in wizards economy, if you're an potential investor, would be businessman, you can't go to a bank to borrow money. So what do? You borrow from wealthy, rich people, you gamble and hope that you get some windfall, or borrow from usurers, and these are dangerous transactions, or basically give up on being a businessman. So this is the banking system of Potterians. Public sector, the government. Okay, they call it Ministry of Magic. If you're Prime Minister is the minister, right? Right, is the Minister of Magic, and the government he runs is really big. They are the primary employer, and in fact, it's the first choice of most wizards. Okay, most wizards, when they finish school, their dream is, for most of them, is to work for the government. Nepotism is common. There's a story of this family that four of these family members work for the same office, so for the government. Their connections are important, but competence is less so. There are no elections, no transparency. Do you remember this? This story, maybe you remember this image, this character from the movies. Her name is Jorkin. What's her name? Jorkin, maybe. This is the lady that disappears for 3 weeks from the office, and nobody noticed it. Why? Because she didn't do anything. So her absence is not noticed. This fellow is an athlete. Actually, he was a wonderful, player. But he was hired because of that. But he has no clue what to do at work. Right? He's completely clueless. Right? So this is Potterian public sector. So the government is big and corrupt, and that leads to rent seeking. If you are not economist, rent seeking is a behavior where you try to extract as much benefit as possible from wherever you are, whatever you do. So if you're a public servant, for instance, perhaps you will be accepting bribes, for instance. That's one way you can take advantage of your position, of the power that comes with your position. This kind of behavior is called rent seeking. When you have corruption, rent seeking becomes a norm. So you see a lot of that in Potterian economics. There is no rule of law. For instance, the severity of the crime depends on the perpetrator. That shouldn't be like that, right? For in one case, self-defense, where nobody was hurt, just self-defense is considered in one episode a severe offense, even though it was just self-defense. And there is another case where a person is blown up and it's kind of nothing serious. It's okay. Persecutor is also the judge. So that distorts the rule of law entirely. Private property is acknowledged, but it can be confiscated without due process. So there is no really market structure. There are two small markets that serve the Potterians. One is in London and the other one in Hogsmeade, if you remember, right? Now, there are some people who sell some stuff, but some of these are regulated, but these regulations are applied selectively. You have monopolies, you have oligarchs, and you have other pathologies in that same vein. Most products are offered by a single seller or single producer. That's what we mean by monopoly, right? For instance, Daily Prophet is the only newspaper. And even that is published biased news. Many producers have been around for generations, which means that the variety of products that Potterians have been consuming have not changed for generations. For instance, we are told that there were only 2 new stores opened during the last 100 years. That's not very dynamic economy. This is very static economy, right? So when you don't have competition, this leads to little choice. For instance, the textbooks, we are told the textbooks children use are the same textbooks that their grandparents used, same ones. When they go to the library to borrow these books, they can find the signatures of their ancestors on these books. They use these books. The candies they use are the same candies that their ancestors ate. The ones they used, what they used to do, hocus pocus, right? The ones. So there are hardly any innovations. And that's not good because there would be a demand. How do we know that? Because we are told that the Weasley brothers opened this new joke shop, and it becomes an instant success, which suggests that there would be a demand for these innovations. There is no economic growth in Potterian economy. How do we know that? Well, Wizard's population is stable. Wizard's population is stable. How do we know that? We are not told. Well, because one school serves the same population since 10th century AD. Think about that. So their population must be stable. Stock of capital, we are not told about anybody taking any kind of undertaking, any kind of investment. When we talk about stock of capital, we mean physical capital, factories, computers, production capacity. Human capital is also constant. When we talk about human capital, we mean know-how, knowledge, set of skills that people have. Even that hasn't changed. For instance, think about that. One of the teachers is a ghost, which means that the curriculum he has been teaching is the same since he died. Just think about that. So there is a technological stagnation. If you literally go in micro zoom, they use these hocus pocus spells, but we are not told about new spells. They are very rare, actually. If you try to remind yourselves, if you look for new spells, which is their technology, right? Part of their technology is spells, right? But there is an exception, however, and that's the broomstick industry. See, new broomstick models come out every year, like cars. This resembles US auto industry. Every year there's this new model, and these new models are faster. They give you better dynamic control. Remember, you fly with broomstick, right? And so it gives you better control, better precision. For instance, Firebolt is the Cadillac of broomsticks, right? It can go from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 10 seconds, we are told. Right? This is a dream broomstick for Harry Potter when he does window shopping, if you remember. That's Firebolt, his dream, right? So, but here's the problem. As an economist, I look at this, I say, okay, they have innovations in broomstick industry. However, broomsticks are used mostly for leisurely activities, for Kittredge games. Remember this? Look at that. I got this also. Okay. For Kittredge games. And so we don't see it. Same place where you buy Potterian money, that's where you buy this also, okay? Okay. So we don't see a spillover of these innovations from broomstick industry to broader economy, to other industries. So we don't see any evidence of any technological progress, really. And so, as far as we can tell, there is no economic growth in Potterian economy. So it's stagnating, it's static. People live there the same way as they lived 10 centuries ago. Things haven't changed much. This is Potterian economic world, very different from modern world, of course. Now, there are other topics that we actually study in the paper. And here I skip here. We discuss labor markets. So we talk about labor markets. So we talk about market. You know, there you have elves, for instance, that are equivalent to foreign workers, perhaps, underpaid, being taken advantage of. They resemble that. We talk about international trade, because there's a little bit trade in Potterian economy. We can talk about marketing. So for instance, when Weasley brothers opened their joke shop, they try to promote it, they publish a newspaper, they have difficulty. Okay, so how marketing works in that world. Information provision in general, right? Marketing is about information provision. There are other aspects, public choice, public finance, how they finance their affairs, Potterians. It's not, the public sector, it's not clear. Why? Because taxes are never mentioned or discussed in this 7-volume set. Taxes, how is it possible to have such a big government, wasteful government, inefficient government? Somebody has to pay for it. And so that's what taxes, you know, when you look back at look at the historical sites in Georgia, right? If you go to Mtscheta, which monastery is it in Mtscheta, right? This amazing, magnificent building. How was it built? It was built by people who worked really, really hard, but they were paid by taxing people. Taxes were used to finance these kinds of huge projects. There is no other way. So, because there is no focus there. So this is a puzzle. Now think about that. The entire story takes place in a school. Hogwarts. That's the school. That's where it takes all this, all the events, that's where they happen. But so Potterians on one hand value highly education. For instance, Professor Dumbledore is a highly respected individual because he's a professor, right? He's a knowledgeable person. Yet Potterians don't have any institute of higher education. So as soon as they finish, they graduate, they go to work for the government. Doesn't make any sense. Who pays for this education? In a newspaper interview, Rowling actually said that education is free. If there are no taxes, how is it possible that education is free? You see, things don't add up. You see, we as economists, this doesn't make sense to us. Now, you see, this doesn't make sense to us, not only in reality, but it doesn't make sense to us in economic models also. You see, I'm talking about Potterian economy as an economic model, but it's not a good economic model, you see. Things are not consistent. You see, our economic models do not have these kinds of inconsistencies. And so in that sense, it's not really, so Harry Potter books are full of economic ideas, lots of them. Let me share with you something. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you now is, let's see where it is. The paper where we discuss these things. Let me see. And this paper, no, that's not there. Okay. Hang on, give me a second. Sorry, I thought it was here. Okay, here we go. This is what I wanted to show you. And I'll share this with you. This is appendix to the paper. And what we list here are economic ideas found here. And just look at the list of the economic ideas that we find here. And actually in the appendix, we discuss the relevant text and on which page it is. So you can actually locate this. So for instance, counterfeit money, there's discussion of people who counterfeit money, right? Constraints, opportunity cost. These are all economic terms, economic constructs, economic ideas, okay? Foreign currency, how you handle foreign currency, greedy bankers. Let's see what we have. Sticky prices 1, sticky prices 2. Look at this here. Okay, withdrawing money from the bank, services offered. Wizards face difficulties handling muggle money. How the Weasley brothers borrow money from Harry Potter because they can't borrow from the bank, but they also borrow from goblins who are not really trustworthy, etc. So this list is very long, okay, and many of these events occur in the books a lot actually. And this we had to find by reading these books over and over, ignoring all the fun things and looking for economics actually. It wasn't easy. Okay, so I guess I'm done. Going back to the last slide. So let's see. What do you see here? Do you see the conclusion? No, you don't see. Let me see. I'm finishing because this is last slide. Okay, so and this one, sure. Okay, what do you see now?
Conclusions.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. All right. So Harry Potter's books are full of ideas, but the Potterian model is inconsistent with economic models. Actually, it's a mishmash. Once you think carefully about the economics that you find in, it's a mishmash of all sorts of ideas, Marxian, classical, Keynesian, New Keynesian, all these different kinds of models. And so much of the economic ideas you find there are distorted. Now, why is this important? It's important because Tolstoy and many other well-known authors claim that their goal is to influence people. Their goal is to infect our brains, okay? Like plastilin, they want to actually take our brain and manipulate it. That's what they want to do. That's what they say, okay? If that's true, and if these Harry Potter books have some influence on kids when they read and they learn, so they get some economic ideas, boy, these ideas are very, very wrong. Okay, and so I hope they don't get too much ideas from Harry Potter books. And this is the end of my presentation. I thank you, Guram, for the kind invitation. Zalian Didi Madloba. And I finished it at It was supposed to go to 6 o'clock. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, and we can stay as long as you have time and as long as people have time. But yeah, no, the timing is perfect right now.
Okay, super. And I'm really delighted to see all of you. This is great, and so I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about anything else if you guys, whatever you guys would like.
Maybe I'll start with one question.
Please.
So you mentioned that there were some other books that have been studied in the economic lens. And I had maybe questions about which of these fiction books would you recommend to teach economics to little kids to kind of get started with like the most right ideas and the most closest to the reality?
Probably Tolkien's books are well known. Asimov's books are also well known for these kinds of contents. What else? I'm looking at the bookshelf here. These are the two that comes to mind particularly. Once you describe life, any kind of social perspective. So once you describe group of people, which means you are describing social perspective here, because they interact with each other, some form of interaction, then economic institutions become part of this. To give you just a sense of what do I mean. Suppose we're describing a family setting. So there's a story and describe, and then family members sit around the table and then they do all sorts of things for each other, help, or they pass, right? We do all of these things. These family members, we exchange gifts with each other. So this is a trade. You can describe the interaction around the table as trade. Or when we buy gifts for each other in a family, you can think of it as a trade. See, as soon as you start looking at the human interaction, economic institutions emerge endogenously, almost. And so you can't escape that. And a lot of these interactions, it's sometimes hard to see that this interaction have economic aspects, but they do. They certainly can be described that way, even if the participants did not see this that way. Okay, so this is just an example. So you will find a lot of economics in a lot of settings, in many books and many stories. And they emerge naturally there. When I say endogenous, I mean naturally, they emerge there. Right, so.
Thank you for the answer. თუ ვინმეს გინდათ ქართულად კითხვის დასმა, შეგვიძლია ასე ვკადოთ, რამე ტექნიკური კითხვა იქნება, თუ არა ვისაც უნდა კითხვის დასმა, შეგიძლიათ ან ჩატში დაწეროთ, ან პირდაპირ დასვათ კითხვა. მადლობა.
Can I ask?
Yes, please, David.
Yeah, great presentation, great insights. Actually, thank you for presenting. So you described most of the things that actually are puzzling into Potterian Economics, and they are not organized as we know in real economics. But do you have anything? What is the opposite? So meaning that it's organized any kind of activity, because you listed number of things that you discuss in your paper, but you did not describe now. Is there any economic activity which is organized, let's say, better or more efficiently, works more efficiently, or organized better way that is organized in real economic activity, in real economy? I mean, for example, trade. Do they have trade wars or this kind of things, which is the other way around?
That's right. This is a great question. Indeed, a lot of the things you see in Potterian world is indeed found in real world. So when regulations are imposed, but people who, if the minister knows this businessman, then he's more lax about this, the way the regulations are applied. These kinds of corrupt activities you find in many economies. More importantly, the one item I mentioned, but I didn't include there, an important sentence, has to do with economic growth. You see, Potterian world is consistent with Solow model. In what sense? Solow model predicts that in order to have economic growth, you need population growth that will lead to increase in, that will help you increase output. You need to increase capital. That will increase per capita output, and then you need technological progress that will lead to sustained increase in per capita income. That will lead to the actual, what we call economic growth, right? So the key, the three ingredients in Solow model is population, capital, and technology. What we described here, what we discovered in Potterian world is that population is not growing, capital is not growing, not human, not physical capital, and there is hardly any technological progress. Given that, you shouldn't see any growth, and indeed, that's what happens there. You don't see any economic growth. So this part of the Potterian economy is consistent with Solow's model and with what we see, and that's that other paper we wrote. It was published in a book. It's called Economic Growth in Potterian Economy. So this is a great question. Yes, David, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question, please.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
At first, I want to mention that I'm a huge fan of Harry Potter, but after this presentation, I realized again from different perspective.
Terrible. Oh, I'm sorry. I spoiled it. Oh.
And my question is about, as I remember, there was one scenario when people from Hogwarts make trade from Romania, if I correct this country.
That's right.
Correct.
That's right.
And when they buy dinosaur, and based on this fact, can we assume that how can they exchange this dinosaur? I mean, what currency they have? And based on this fact, can we say that the entire world has only one currency?
That's right. That's right. So I thought that. So on one hand, there are two parallel worlds in Potterian world, because there are the wizards and there are muggles, right?
Right.
So I think that this same currency, this Romanian imported galleons were half-cup size, if you remember, they were like big, right size. So I think that the story she describes is as if the wizards have their own world, and they are not limited to London and right to the UK. There are some wizards in the other parts of the world, but they use same technology for doing these things. But there is this other parallel world. I think that's how I understand this story. That's how it makes sense to me. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, maybe.
So you can think of it as economists, you can think of it as currency, what we call this, currency union, right? So currency unions are the language we use for this, right? So they have currency unions, basically. So that would be my way of making sense of, right? Remember, we take a story and we try to make sense of this, looking at it from economist's point of view, and it is challenging. It is fun, but challenging. Yes, that's...
Yeah, it's clear. Yes.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Daniel, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Actually, I don't have a question, but I have one comment. So
yes, please.
I'm teaching economics, and I'm kind of trying to search economics in everyday life, and that's my passion. And now I realize that I will have another additional passion, like to search economics in literature. So that's something what I have not thought about.
Absolutely. And Harry Potter would be a wonderful homework assignment Absolutely. To give them, okay, read 3 chapters. It's in half an hour they read 3 chapters and see how many economic ideas you can find there. And then you can look at the list in the appendix here. I can send it to you, and then you have the list. So absolutely, and they will have fun as well as they will learn at the same time, right? And then they will read literature also. Look at this.
Thank you. I've already downloaded your paper from internet, so I will read it.
Wonderful. Please make sure the appendix is there. If not, then I will send it to you. Okay. All right. Super, super. Thank you, Maka.
I also have one question.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
We know that, for example, if we take Wizards of Oz, we know that the story was about deflation in America, and that was relevant. Can we say that even Harry Potter is some kinds of reflection of real event which actually happened in the world, in our world, or not? Or it's just fantasy?
No, now you're asking a tough question. So here are some possible answers. One possible answer is that, first of all, I guess you guys all know that the Harry Potter story began as some kind of story she decided to invent for your daughter, I think, as she was putting her in bed. And so she kind of began telling the story, making it up, and then she discovered that this she had to be creative to make it somehow consistent, and then that led to the story itself, to Harry Potter adventure. Now, given this, one possible answer is that this is the worldview of one person, the author, singles, right? She raised her kid, I think, by herself. She studied French literature, I think, or maybe literature and French language in the college. And so this reflects her worldview. So it's a worldview of one person. But I don't think you can, even if it was true, I don't think we can dismiss that. Because if 6.5% of world population read this book and they love it, as you said, you love it. And I love this. We read it with kids, right, more than once, etc. Then this is more than just a story, because this does impact us somehow in the back of our mind, even if it's not conscious. Now, alternative way of describing this would be that when she was making up the story, she was thinking about some kind of medieval time, because a lot of the components of the story fits medieval period. So you have all these different goblins and all of these things that sometimes you find in medieval, right, stories that from that period. The fact that you use commodity money, it's not very modern, so that also goes back to those days. So maybe what she wanted to do is to describe this medieval world and some kind of set of adventures or some combination of these two. Here is the problem. What I read was that Asimov was best biologist among non-biologists, okay? And he was best mathematicians among non-mathematicians. What does it mean? It means that basically when you are an author, it doesn't give you a right to write everything, to make up everything. Things have to be consistent. J.R. Tolkien, I read, studied 16 years, this whatever he was going to write about before he began writing. 16 years, basically research. So I don't know whether J.R. Tolkien did something of that sort. And so perhaps that's why we see all these inconsistencies. So it's hard to tell what does this description, what is it? Is it your worldview? It is a worldview of, it's based on some movie. She saw some good story and then she said, okay, oh, this was a great story. Now she writes 7 books on that. I don't know. It's really interesting question. But my argument, I hope you will agree, is that regardless of that, it's a great question. It would be great if we could answer, but I think it's, even if we don't have an answer to this question, I think it's interesting to do what the exercise we did, because so many people love this book. So many people can relate to it somehow. So many people, yeah. There are other inconsistencies that, the fact that, I emphasized that bankers are viewed negatively. This is, for instance, a contradiction. Why it's a contradiction? Because Harry Potter books are viewed by a lot of people as opposing prejudice, and it is for inclusiveness and rather than exclusiveness. Harry Potter, that's the image of Harry Potter books, but this is not what's happening with bankers, right? Bankers, economists teach, are doing great service. Of course, they are greedy, but that's their job. They make money because that's their job. And if they make too much money, then maybe there is a problem with regulation, right? But bankers in general do important service in the economy, that intermediation that I described. So the fact that she describes them, this portrays them so negatively, is very inconsistent with modern economist worldview, for instance.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas.
And one additional question, if I can. Now, I think I don't have a clear picture, but what do you think? Can we say that because there is no fiat money in this economy, that's why no taxes are mentioned in this book? Can we connect them to each other somehow?
Maybe. Typically, so here's what we did. You're right. So when something is not mentioned, then it makes you wonder. So same thing, we did same thing with taxes. We don't know what happens with Potterians regarding taxes. Taxes are not mentioned, so we don't know if they pay or not. So I agree with you. This is the method we had to employ when you don't have something mentioned. So you say, okay, it's not mentioned. So this is the model economy that you find there. So it's not there. It's not part of the model. Okay. So is that because she assumed that there are no taxes? It's an assumption. We make many assumptions. Like physicists make assumption that there is no friction. We assume that there is no government. Sometimes we model simple models without government. It's an assumption, a simple model. Maybe she assumed that there are no taxes, but I don't know that, right? I can't tell that. So it's an interesting question. We use this kind of approach. You're correct. You're correct. So some things we had to deduce from the fact that things were not there. We're not part of it. Right.
And in general, what do you think? Why bankers don't lend money? What should be the reason?
So I don't know. It's in the story, bankers have very bad negative image. They are portrayed very negatively, if you remember. So the movie adaptation took that, of course, and took it to the extreme to make the right to depict them the way they depicted. It looks like it's reminiscent. That's my view, but it's really an interpretation reminiscent of the ancient times, that once bankers were. Now it could be, here's a simple thing. It could be that Miss Rowling, when she was raising her kid, she went to the bank. She was trying to, before she got wealthy, she tried to borrow money and she could. Nobody lent her because she wasn't making enough money.
A good explanation.
Yeah. And then she said, "Oh, this I don't know what she said. Coming out of bank angry, right? These bastards, right? These greedy bankers, right?" And then she went and wrote that. Could be also.
Yeah, it could be.
This is. I never sent this paper to J.K. Rowling, and I very much hope that she hasn't seen that. Because we are trying to be very polite, but I think in between the lines you can see the criticism there. So Yeah.
I have a general economics question.
Please,
And
please.
yeah, maybe because yeah, you in the beginning mentioned a few concepts about like closing gaps and how developing economies are developing faster rather than compared to the developed ones. And I have a question about the whole what has happened in the last year and a half with the pandemic and how that has impacted the world. There have been many different things that have been coming out, such as like the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. People talk about K-style recovery, where basically some sectors will be able to recover really fast and some sectors might even disappear. I was wondering, as an experienced economist, if you could like tell us about your opinions about like the current economic situation and what's going to happen, or maybe even, because this is far from trivial questions, I would imagine, maybe point us into some towards some resources that we could look at and learn more about the sort of dynamic situation that we are in.
That's right. So in terms of resources, international world organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are posting, they have daily releasing reports and blogs and articles, research papers discussing all of these things. Most economists, young economists in particular, seem to be busy with these questions that you are asking, because these are the like hottest questions, more like questions that everybody now faces. We just held our annual conference here in Israel, the Israeli Economic Association annual conference, and so many papers were about that precisely. So I can summarize briefly the main view that we heard there. It looks like the biggest concern is that what we are about to witness next few months is what is known as jobless recovery. Typically, when the economy recovers, in economy we experience business cycles. Business cycles are like regular cycles. You can imagine sinusoids and cosinusoids, except that they are not predictable. Sinusoid you can predict, right? If you know the value X, you know what is sinus of X, so you can predict. Business cycles cannot be predicted, okay? But we experience, when you look back at history, economies experience booms and busts, booms and busts. So in that sense, we have cycles. Now, typically, these cycles have very structured form. During contraction, when the economy shrinks, unemployment rate goes up because we produce less, people consume less. So if we produce less, then less people are employed, so more people get unemployed. So unemployment increases, and sometimes it can increase dramatically, right? If you get into deep recession, for instance. Now, when the macroeconomy goes the other way, recovers, you see exactly opposite. Now I'm describing regular situation. What does it mean? When the economy recovers, output increases slowly, people are buying more, and if people are buying more, firms are producing more, and they are hiring more workers, and so unemployment goes down. And so if we say that unemployment is, we have this language, pro-cyclical, anti-cyclical, what goes with cycle and what goes opposite to the cycle, etc. Okay. Now, this particular event, people are worried will lead to jobless recovery, meaning the economies will recover, but unemployment will remain high, which is not what happens usually. Why? Because lots of businesses learned how to get more efficient. In this current recession, lots of businesses had to manage with fewer people. Lots of people got ill. Lots of people could not show up, or were not allowed to show up, etc. And so they had to make their businesses, production lines, more efficient. And so now they discover that there are better ways of doing what they are doing. And therefore, now they can increase production with fewer workers than before. And therefore, this will be there will be a transition period. Well, we'll have a long period of unemployment, and the people that wherever they were employed, they will have to find other jobs. Some of these changes might require structural changes in the economy, right? So if you have, say, lots of people working in the restaurant industry, so now they don't need as many waiters, waitresses, because most people now do it for takeout. They so they need less. So they have to find some other skill set, so they can find jobs in other industries. So that transition will require structural adjustment. And so this is one big thing that everybody talks about. So this is the concern. And this is true for many, many industries. For instance, even heavy industries that they didn't shut down, but they had to do with fewer workers. Okay, with fewer workers. A lot of us began buying online that we never bought. So I got used to ordering my groceries from this supermarket. So now I'm continuing, even though in Israel there is no corona, basically it's gone. We don't wear even masks now. We go and it's open, and because we are all vaccinated, I think, etc. But we got used to this home delivery of groceries. So instead of spending 3 hours in supermarket, I'd rather do something else. And so I don't go to supermarkets. Supermarket now has to, needs fewer workers in the store. Okay, so all of this requires adjustment, and that's the big thing, I think. This is the biggest change that the pandemic will bring about, looks like.
Thank you. That was a very exhaustive answer.
I apologize, long answer, too short question.
No,
that's
absolutely.
a great question. And I did that. I went to that cycle side because, given your background, I know that the cycle sinusoids are easy and trivial for you. And so, but in economics, we talk about business cycles and we teach that. And this is first lecture in macroeconomics is business cycles, the sinusoids and cosinusoids.
კი თუ გაქვთ ვინმეს კითხვები შეგიძლიათ თან დასვათ ან მოგწეროთ
You don't have to ask. If you don't have questions, that's okay. It's okay to stop if you want. I'm happy to be here, really. But feel free, whatever you want to do, please. And I have not been at the ISET last year, and I look forward to returning there in February. I very much, So it will be great to be back in Tbilisi there. And
We're waiting and looking forward to have you here back.